So yes, I'm principal lecturer of Anglia Ruskin, and in fact, academia nowadays is kind of I would say, a relatively smallish piece of my work because, let me kind of take a step back. I used to be a full-time academic about 10 years ago, and I used to work for University of East London, where I created the first Masters in Applied Political Psychology, which was the second program in the world at this point in time. That was about 15 years ago, more, something like that. And
what was the subject? I'm sorry, I missed the subject of your course that you...
Positive psychology.
Positive psychology, yeah.
Yeah, positive psychology, what's that? It's basically the scientific study of everything to do with how to live your life well, which is well-being, engagement, strengths, etc. So in a sense, everything that you would see in pop media with regard to psychology, most of the time, it's actually positive psychology, I would say. So I used to be full-time. I moved to France 10 years ago. And actually, at that point, my university wasn't particularly pleased that I was going to work remotely. So which is why I actually stepped down from academia, started my own company. And then a couple of years later, actually went partly back to academia, and that was in Anglia Ruskin University. Well, Anglia Ruskin because the Vice Chancellor of UAL actually moved to Anglia Ruskin to run it at the time. Mike Sworn, and I knew him very well, so he actually invited me to sort of rejoin back, but differently. So kind of from the beginning, it was very clear that I don't live in England anymore. Anyway, so I created another Masters in Applied Political Psychology at Anglia Ruskin University. So in reality, I'm part-time academic. I'm 0.5 technically. In reality, it's probably something like probably 0.5 is all the research I'm doing, probably, in reality. And then I'm another sort of full-time, in addition, on running my own consultancy and business. So I used to actually have a lot of communication with the media before, when I was at University of East London. I used to have journalists calling a couple of times a week, most of the time, so it's kind of something I'm quite familiar with. Since I stepped down and it was very sort of key position at that point. Since I stepped down, I wasn't very much solicited, not as much. And sometimes the press office of Anglia Ruskin sends me something, I respond, I do a bit of interviews, but not much, not anywhere near as it used to be. In France, though, I am also probably more solicited in France nowadays, in fact, than in England. For interviews, and I do have a regular column in one of the publications. It's actually a publication called Political Psychology. It's a monthly journal, magazine, based magazine, and it's very popular. So it's kind of I have a one page here going every month. Right. So I'm quite familiar with writing. I'm quite familiar with writing for media, with writing for press, with how to say difficult things in a simple way, kind of all of these things, and how to not to get carried away when you're talking to a journalist. So all of this stuff I'm quite familiar with.
So with your Anglia Ruskin role then, are you carrying out research for them?
Yes, I'm carrying out research, full stop, and I do publish it on the Anglia Ruskin, on the Anglia Ruskin profile. Whenever I publish, I do it under Anglia Ruskin, yes.
And so what's the nature of the research?
So my research topics, specifically research topics, is anything to do with positive psychology in a broad sense, but more specifically resilience and well-being. So anything around the definitions of well-being, anything around interventions around well-being and resilience. So it's more, how do you build more resilience? How do you build more well-being? So there is a lot of stuff. I have quite applied research. So I've developed different programs, lots of programs for young people, for example, for adults as well. And a lot of it is intervention research. So, for example, during COVID, I've run a trial, a controlled trial of a online resilience intervention, online resilience program. And we actually demonstrated, at the moment trying to write it up for publication, we actually demonstrated that yes, in relatively low cost fashion, you can actually increase resilience, minimize depression, increase work engagement, etc., by doing something like 8 sessions online for 1.5 hours. Okay, so this is the type of research I do. I have also other research interests around time and time use and time perspective. So basically how to use your time better around questions like this. So, and specifically also around positive education. So how do we help children? How do we help teenagers to develop better psychological skills? So these are my main research interests. But when I write more broadly than my research interest as well. So because positive psychology is quite a big area, I can comment and I can write on strengths. Yes, strengths is also one of my research areas anyway. I can write on strengths. So obviously resilience, well-being. Very important. I can write on work engagement. Basically, how do people do at work nowadays? How do we measure engagement? Is engagement going up or is it going down, for example? How do we re-engage remote workforce, for example, under COVID circumstances? How do we strike the right balance between basically remote work and office presence? How all of these type of questions. So it's, again, another line of my work is organizational work, which is also where I do most of consulting. So it's part of my consulting, which is why it's actually quite difficult to divide the two. I do also research as part of my consulting activity. So, for example, I've been working for the past 3 years with the government of the Emirates, of the UAE. I've been measuring well-being and engagement at the level of the country there. And that's my paid consultancy activity. That's actually at the same time research. So, for example, at the level of EE, we know that the difference between 2019 and 2020 is that actually people in work in private sector actually became happier, which is not what you would expect, but actually they're happier because they travel less, because they rest a bit more, because they have slightly less pressure when they're working from home. In fact, they're actually finding the work balance, life balance a little bit easier to handle, and their happiness actually at work increased, for example, which is quite an amazing finding. Yeah. So, we do measure every 2 years the whole well-being of the public workforce of the whole country with 40,000 people. Anyway, so to give you some ideas, it's actually quite a lot, and what the line is quite difficult because there is research, but there is also research and consultancy and research, and they really actually interact quite well because I'm being contracted for my consultancy services. That include research, not only training.
Yeah, and your consultancy is called Positran, is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. My consultancy is called Positran. Yeah.
So the work you mentioned, the work around the UAE, then are you making use of that for Anglia Ruskin at all? Then
I will, with the permission. In fact, so everything that gets published would go under Anglia Ruskin name because that's my academic affiliation. So anything I publish goes under two basically. It's Anglia Ruskin first because it's an academic affiliation, and Positran second because it's my consultancy affiliation. So I actually use two affiliations. So everything publishable is under Anglia Ruskin, which is a kind of good win-win situation, basically. So yes, for example, something like UE, I will be publishing, and we normally have a broad, once the reports are communicated, because we just done this piece of work very recently, this last one, 2019-2020 comparison, and once it's communicated out, they're actually quite okay for us to go ahead and publish the findings, because it's quite interesting, it's quite unusual. Everybody's saying that well-being of people at work is decreasing. We actually have an completely alternative data and suggesting something otherwise. So once they have communicated their findings more in a media-friendly fashion, put it this way, we can go either ahead and communicate it here because I've done it, okay? Right. Or we can wait until they should transform it into academic publication and then communicate them. So that's not a problem.
Right. And do you have any research findings or papers that are about to come out in the next couple of months?
There's one that came out recently, but that's probably not very interesting because that was on resilience of young people in Japan. So it's probably not hugely media friendly. I'm finishing the paper on the COVID and resilience, and this is something, if it's accepted, going to come out quite fast because we are going for the fast track publication medium. So we're not going to the usual academic publications where you have to wait the whole year. But nowadays there are good ratings of paid journals, and we just go for paid journals, and it's 3-4 weeks turnaround. So probably next